First up on the work session is the FY2026 Budget.
So, thank you, Mr. Mayor. So, you have in front of you the budget, the discussion that we had at the last meeting. Unfortunately, nothing has changed. One hand after the other. Nothing has changed. Again, the bottom line is that the budget results in an increase in the tax rate of 57 cents. In order for us to pass a budget that follows this discussion and memo I have here, it will be necessary to make an amendment to the budget, as I spoke of earlier. That amendment is on page 2 of this memorandum. That's it. I'm more than willing to answer any questions, of course.
Any questions or comments from the council?
I know it's a little early to ask, but on paper, what would that leave our budget with undesignated fund balance?
I can't answer that question at this time. I have no idea. One of the most dangerous things we do here is we spend a lot of time anticipating and trying to anticipate what our fund balance is. And I'm convinced that that may have contributed to where we were last year. Okay. Because we have an extremely incomplete picture, as you're aware, this time of year.
I know that this is a fragile budget. I spoke a little bit with the city manager this morning. George's borrowing power owes the city right now $1.8 million in taxes. 1.4 from last year has not yet been paid. And the December tax bill of $400,000 has been paid as well. So, even though we have an undesignated fund balance of X amount of money, a lot of it is in receivable. So, it would be very, very, very dangerous and irresponsible to use undesignated fund balance as a cushion. Until this has been done. There was a hearing today in the bankruptcy court. I don't know what the transpired.
Then basically I moved to confirm the plan. Confirm the bankruptcy plan. It didn't appear that there was any objections that were going to come forward with. And in that plan is our payment of the taxes.
I think the attorney representing the city in the bankruptcy proceedings need to stress upon all parties involved that the city can't wait until FERC and New Hampshire FSEC approve the plan before we get paid. I think we need to get our money ASAP.
Which is exactly the conversation.
Okay. FERC could take months to approve. And, we have obligations in the city. We got a city to run, we got kids to educate, we got a police department, and working with an undesignated fund balance that's largely just on paper until you have the money, it's a little unnerving. We were here before in 2002. We're getting extremely close to that situation until that's resolved.
Any council comments, questions? Council portion?
We were here a few weeks ago, we presented the budget to the city, public hearing on it. I believe we're at 57 cents at that point.
We were, yes, for the contracts were included in the budget, we were at 57 cents.
Okay. So the contract being the two we signed late, not including the police, correct?
The three, it's,
Fire, public works,
it's included.
clerical, okay. And so that's where it went from 57 down to the 70 something?
It was like 87 cents, almost a 30-cent increase. And you folks all told me you didn't want that.
Right. That was my clarity, I asked that last time, and I didn't get the right answer. But that actually had a little bit more clarity to it. But then I saw these savings go up, and I'm thinking, jackpot, we get that number down. And it jumped back to 57 cents again, I'm like, what's happening? So that at least clarifies that. And we're only at the police program, just on property now.
Well, right now, it's not included in this budget, and the chief and I are going to have to work during the year to figure out how he's going to get through the year. And he really liked that I told him we were going to lay people up in this department at the first meeting. But, no, the chief and I had a conversation the day after that meeting, so we know we got work ahead of us.
That's perfect. So I have a question comes in, things like the grant work and the stuff that we've been approving and stuff, that's not included in this budget either, correct?
It is, but it's in another fund, and it doesn't affect the budget.
Okay.
So the way a grant budget basically works is, I'm sure you're aware, we have, let's say we have $5 million in grants. We have $5 million in revenue, $5 million in expenditure. The trick is, until we're 100% approved, we don't expend anything towards that $5
So
million.
you can't do that particular function until it's.
Right.
Can't spend it, and you can't claim the revenue.
Right. And then they're reimbursable grants. We don't have any grants that they actually send us a check or a wire transfer. They're all reimbursable. So the danger becomes, if we get a lot of them, that's great. But then we run into a cash flow problem because there's a 30 to 60 day lag time after the expenditure. You file for payment, goes to the state of New Hampshire, and the state of New Hampshire has a payment process, which I fully understand and agree with, but that's 30 to 60 days. So you can see that the timing becomes important, especially when we don't see revenue from taxes and fees, those types of things.
And is the window for grants now closed? Is it?
It's always open. We're always looking.
If there are opportunities that arose from recent legislation or whatever things that are going on, we can take those
The
opportunities.
council vote. We bring it forward to you. We do it all year long. It's more, unfortunately, they're reactive.
Right.
So when we find out, we're notified, we apply, it goes in front of you folks, and then it gets moved forward. And then we also have a grants portal, I don't know if that's the right term, but in BSNA, we have a way, we actually track them, so that we're paying against the grant, just like we would anything else. And it shows when the reimbursements come in, and it's one place where we track them.
Any other council comments, questions? Council
Really
Lawrence?
quickly that, tonight's gonna come down to a couple of sound bites, and I want everybody to understand the work that's been done here, and what we've looked at, the sacrifices that we've made, that people weren't here for. It's easy to say, 57 cents, but we can pay attention to it, a lot of work with it. Come down to, what are we gonna do about it? What are we gonna get rid of? What are we willing to sacrifice?
Anything else from the council?
One thing real quick, I don't want to be the bearer of all bad news all the time. We do have opportunities as we evolve in the future. The first one being, we have debt service that's coming off next year. I'm going to implore upon you to put that towards capital improvements and not recurring expenditures. And we also have only 1 year now, I can't believe this, a little over 1 year left of the payment of the taxes agreement with Burgess. Plan, we're working now, but we plan on negotiating a new one. The problem is, we have to wait till bankruptcy court finishes up, so we know who we're negotiating with. But our plan, of course, is, that was a short-term fix. We want to get back on track for a long-term one. as it relates to payment in lieu of taxes agreements, the one for the greenhouse increases annually, and it also increases if they build the other greenhouse, which I understand they're already starting work on. So there is some good news for the future.
All right, there's nothing else from the council? Go ahead, Council President.
When is that a fiscal year, the debt?
Yes.
Yes. So it's not like June it's gonna end,
This next year's budget will drop.
I think those payments are due in September.
Yes, sir.
September, August, I don't know which one you're referring to right off the top, but
But they're
all over the board, February, so.
We also have loaders that are, as you know, that are starting to drop off as well. Those are our big payments from Public Works, so. Once those drop off, which we'll be finished with that in about probably another 4 years. Once those drop off, I'm still gonna recommend you put money in Public Works replacement. But their intended useful life cycle is a minimum of 13 years. So you can see there's residual value for us once we pay them off.
How many years?
13.
30.
After 13, you really should be buying a new one because now you're putting rust back together.
Okay.
Mayor, I was wondering if I could speak at this point.
Typically, work session goes to a council vote. I have no problem with it. Council have a problem? No problem.
You got a department head, who wants to say something.
Go right ahead.
I just wanted to address some of the questions that have been reported and come from the council regarding class size and our school budget. First of all, I understand the concern about class size. It does look deceiving when you look at the high school and it says that your English average class size is 11. And that's misconstrued a little bit. Can be misconceptions there. The high school schedules are used to work with, as you will imagine. We need to provide certain courses. Each subject area teacher needs to be certified in specifically. So mixed in with that like average of 11 for English is also some of our English classes for the very cognitively impaired students, which may have 2 or 3 students in them. Also AP classes, advanced classes for English and honors that may have only 6 or 7 students in it. So the bulk of the classes, however, are anywhere between 20 to 24 students. To take a teacher out of the high school and cut a class, that's tough because we have what we need to meet school approval and accreditation that we ask. If we look at the other levels, the middle school, to take one teacher out, you would have to really take a whole team of teachers out because each grade level has 4 subject area teachers. If you do that, your classes are going to be over 30 class sizes, which I don't think would fit in the classrooms that we're in right now in this case. At the elementary level, it's a little easier to schedule. That one, we do have a couple smaller size classrooms, just because of the size of each grade level homework coming through, and those would be at grades 4 and 5. But right behind that are larger class sizes again. So that's difficult. We do review that, and if we don't get more applicants, we may be forced to reduce some teaching positions. But I also wanted to speak to our situation with the with the fire alarm system at the high school. To meet code, we need to have that done immediately. We're putting it together piecewise to make the repairs we need to make to get that up to code. As I told you, and you have in the budget, there's $400,000 of unspoken funds coming back to you. Anything above that, we are funneling towards that fire alarm system because the work needs to begin this week and spring gets out. Then from next year's budget, the remainder will have to come. And if we have any openings for teachers, that's probably where the money's gonna go to pay for that. We've been through the budget over and over. I was hoping to give you something else, even if it was $50,000 that I could give you to reduce the tax rate. I just can't right now. I'm the business manager, and I have sat down, we've reviewed it. Any cuts that we make for next year, I think we're gonna have to go towards that $600,000 final excess. This is the first year I've been really nervous. COVID funds were nice. So thank you for letting me speak. I just wanted to address this.
Absolutely, Ed. Thank you for speaking. Anything else for the council? All right, then nothing else from the council. Then we'll move on to next on the work session, assessing items, starting with next with the tax deferral.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. You have a request for a disabled tax deferral for 117 Emery Street for Shelley Bodette. Taxpayer made an application. They reviewed it, our assessing consultant, and they recommend that we approve this application because it meets the guidelines. So I would request that the city vote to approve the disabled tax deferral for 117 Emery Street as presented.
So moved. Second. All right, I have a motion from Councilor Grenier, second by Councilor Morency. Any discussion amongst the council? All right, there being no discussion amongst the council, all in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, tax deferral approved for 117 Emery Street.
You have, abatements are next. So you have an abatement recommendation, Bennett Realty LLC, Stephen Bennett, and this is for 5 St. Laurent Lane, which is a property that's classified as a self-storage facility. Taxpayer wanted relief on the land valuation being too high. The assessor has reviewed the taxpayer's information in the record cards. The buildings were listed incorrectly as commercial, generating a per square foot value. When correctly coded as self-storage, the value drops, and they are recommending that you issue the assessed value, reduce the assessed value based on that methodology from $752,400 to $448,300. I would so recommend that you approve this abatement as presented.
All right, then we'll move to Councilor Donovan, second from Councilor Higby. Discussion?
These are probably, how long has it been open? You think the long amount, 2 years? We're seeing another
He
abatement.
just built it, so this is his first full tax year.
Any other discussion amongst the council? Let there be no further discussion, all in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right. Tax abatement approved for 33 Jericho Road. Who's next?
Okay, you have one for Donald and Patricia Piper, Hermanson Street, and that is the taxpayer stated the value was too high, supplied some comps, and the assessor's office reviewed it. The neighboring properties on the street have had various economic adjustments because of proximity to the nursing home, and the office is going to apply a 3% economic adjustment for proximity and 5% for being overbuilt, which would result in reducing the value from $436,800 to $393,600. Accordingly, I would recommend that you approve this abatement as presented, abatement request as presented.
Motion to approve, motion from Councilor Higby, second from Councilor Thorson. Any further discussion?
Yep.
Yes, sir.
Another question, I'm sorry. Are we approving the abatement for the dollar amount being paid, or the abatement on the value of the house?
Value. Yeah, all these abatements are for values, they're not for...
Any other questions about the council? Any no other further question, all in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, tax abatement approved for 32 Ramsey Street.
The next one is for 690 Lancaster Street. And this one is an abatement where the taxpayer felt value is too high, supplied market analysis from a local realtor. And we reviewed the information on the record card. The subject was listed, property was listed as very good but the list of notes indicate it's in good condition. They're gonna change the overall condition down to good, which would reduce the assessed value from 148.8 to 126.1. Again, I would ask that the council approve this abatement request as presented.
Councilor Corson, second by Councilor Morency. Any discussion? Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, tax abatement approved for 691 Castro Street.
Next one you have is for 96 Bemis, David and Gina Martin. And the taxpayer requested an abatement. Single-family home constructed in 2024 was only 60% complete as of 4/1, situated on 3.52 acres. Taxpayer feels land value is too high based on a city water easement across the property that limits what can be built. There was no, the taxpayer didn't supply an opinion of market value in the land of the building. Assessor's office was aware of the easement, had already applied a 50% off of market value on the backland for that easement. There was no discount applied to the first acre prime site as it is fully supporting a single-family building. Based on that information, the assessor would recommend that you deny this abatement application, which I agree with, and I would ask that the council move to deny the abatement application as presented.
Motion to deny. All right, motion to deny, Councilor Higby, second from Councilor Valerino. Any discussion? There being no discussion, all in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, motion to deny abatement.
Next one you have is for 27 Glen Avenue, Tina Marie Raymond. Taxpayer requested an abatement. Taxpayer stated the valuation is too high due to extensive damage caused by a fire in 2022. The home is in various stages of repair, only lives in one room of the home. Staff visited the property in May of 2025, found no changes since the last visit in 2024. We've had an override value on the building since the fire of 22. Building value has been $14,700 for the last 3 years, and it should be noted if there was no override, the building value would be at $96,000. So, based on this information, the recommendation is to deny the abatement application, which I would support, and I would ask that you move to do so.
I'll make that motion.
All right, a motion from Councilor Valerino, second from Councilor Quarles. Any discussion? There being no discussion, all in favor to deny the abatement? Aye. Any opposed? All right, abatement denied. All right, next up on the work session is a land use change tax.
Yep, you have land use change tax for Bruce Lutska for a property on 120 West Milan Road. And it is because owners have built 2 sheds in a 24 by 42 building, which would take a certain amount of land out of current use, and the land use change tax would be $150 because the full and true market value of the change would be $1,500. So the change tax would be $150. I would recommend that, since the sheds are there in the building, that the council approve this land use change tax as requested.
Motion to approve. Motion to approve from Councilor Higby, second from Councilor Morency. Any discussion amongst the council? Any no further discussion? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right. Approved. That's what we got.
Next is, I think that's all, yeah, that's it.
That's it. All right.
Yeah, next is sewer abatements.
Sewer abatements, my apologies.
Okay, you have a number of sewer abatements in front of you, and as a reminder, our sewer ordinance so states that we don't give relief for plumbing issues, broken pools, broken pipes, broken hot water heaters, etc. I make recommendations to your council based on that. But as you will see, there are a lot of them that do have some circumstances in there you may choose to consider. Again, the reason I make that recommendation is I make it consistent with the ordinance. So the first one you have is Regina LaPointe of 60 Merrimack Street, and she had a serious leak in her toilet tank. She had a problem finding a plumber. she ended up finding a plumber, she ended up having a large water bill, and the water department routinely will abate a portion of the administrative charge for water in these situations. Even though they have made the water, it has gone through the meter and been delivered to the house. So in this case, this person is requesting an abatement because their sewer bill is $2,566 this year, and it is not generally that high, and it is nowhere near that. And as I have to do because of the ordinance, I am going to recommend that that be denied because the water did go through the sewer system because it was a leaky toilet.
Discussion. Councilor Graham.
I know this woman on Merrimack Street. She is very old. She's trying to stay in her house, leave her taxes current. She's doing everything she can. The fact that she couldn't find a professional to fix the problem, it's painful. Did she pay this in full already, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
I think at goodwill, I would move to abate $500 of that. So that, to try to help her out, keep her house, she's in her mid-80s.
Do you know what the previous annual bills were?
She's single.
Yeah, it's in the 200s. 20601 was last year's.
I mean, if this was just negligence, or she wasn't, she didn't pay any attention, that'd be one thing, but she made an effort to have it fixed, couldn't find anybody to have it fixed. She got a bill, she called me, she was broken up. She was in tears.
Councilor Murphy.
I'm going for helping somebody else. The way people struggle. I just want to have a method of differentiating between why they get it and why they don't. Because we're trying to down the tax. Asset will prove that they actually look for somebody that was legal and some so going to trouble helping her out, I just gave them $1,500.
I'm kind of lost my train of thought. It's a huge number to me. So, I'm wondering, does the city have the ability to track water usage and stuff like that? Like, if they see something like this happen on meters and stuff, is there a lighting sign or anything?
We don't do, that's the water meter.
Right.
There are, for disclosure, I served as acting water and sewer superintendent, repeatedly imperative. Our meters have what was called leak detection on them. That is a different style of meter. Unfortunately, I wish I had the answer, but we don't do water here. I don't think we do. So
We're in the process of actually making that change at the waterworks, where they can have the drive-by and get it, and it'll report directly to.
it's a big investment, no question.
This to me seems like it's been on it, it's been leaking for a while, and it must be a massive leak, because the amount of water to be going through.
During the break, I have a visual aid I can go get out of my office. It looks like a little plastic ruler, one of those handouts you get at like a conference, but it has pinholes on it. I want you to see how many gallons go through those holes in the 24-hour period. It is incredibly instructive when you see it. So it's not out of reach for this to happen, unfortunately. That's why it is a good exercise. I'll jump on my utility soapbox for a second to do the dye trick. I put, food coloring dye in your toilet tank every once in a while, and if it shows up when it's not supposed to in the toilet, and you haven't flushed it, you have an issue, and it's going through. So
I agree with both of these. I think we should do something, but then again, you want to set a precedent for anybody who's come in and say, hey, this would happen to me too, and get an abatement.
So, one thing I could offer, the way you could overcome that, is that you could make the abatement not based on the facts, but based on the hardship. Because then a hardship is solely a discretionary decision of this one. And that would not, in my opinion, that would not deteriorate the position of the ordinance. Because you're not acting contrary to your ordinance, you're offering hardship, for lack of a better word. Basically, go down.
So,
Well, I'll reframe my motion to abate $500 based on hardship.
so, all right, so a motion to,
So it'd be a motion to abate $500 of the outstanding sewer bill for 2025 as a hardship abatement.
it's a hardship abatement. All right, so motion from Councilor Grenier, seconded by Councilor Corson for a $500 hardship abatement. Any other question or discussion amongst the council? Any further questions, all in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, $500 hardship abatement approved.
I'm going to do them individually only because they're not, let's say, appropriate to vote on the normal ones. They're all different subjects. So the next one you have is for Raymond and Elaine Dimash, 691 2nd Avenue. Their water bills for the last 3 quarters kept increasing. They discovered that a tenant's toilet was leaking, and they are looking for relief. You can see that the bills did creep up. And the bill almost doubled. Again, in my position, based on the ordinance, I'm denying it because the water went through the sewer system.
Any discussion amongst the council? Councilor Morency.
The former landlord would have addressed this in the first bill. I would have gone in and wondered why the usage was so high.
Right. Any other council questions, comments? So we're gonna stick with the ordinance on this one? I believe so.
Still need a motion to deny it.
At this point, I guess we'll look for a motion to deny the abatement. A motion to deny from Councilor Quala, seconded by Councilor Tavaj. Any further discussion? Thank you. No further discussion. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right. Abatement denied. All right. What's next? Who's that for?
Next one, Errol Decker, Rocky Lane. The water department abated the bill. They were looking to do this as looks like a one-time gesture. They had a leak in the system, and that's all of the information that I received. Again, recommend denial because I don't have any evidence that the water didn't go through the sewer system.
The system's pretty vague, though.
Maybe we ought to put this aside and get some information from the water works.
That's all I was thinking.
What do they mean by leak in the system? Is it his plumbing or is it?
Well, the customer fills this out, and this is the information that I got. So, and we tell them to give us the complete information, and the majority of people do.
Yeah, we can postpone this until our next meeting.
Yeah.
To get more clarity from the water works.
I
The
think
water works said it went through the meeting.
Well, it did go through the meeting. The because otherwise, as you see on the next page, it did go through the meter. So you'll see the usage right there for Mr. Decker, and then they abated that, they dropped that, down to $227.97.
All they do is they abate the assessment.
Yeah, they abated the assessment, that's pretty common, they do that.
I would move to the,
And now I can move Councilor Grenier, seconded by Councilor Valentino. Any further discussion? All in favor of motion to deny, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? It is denied. Next.
So the next one you got is, this is Hill of Grace Realty Trust. This is for 38 Glen Avenue. And this one, the water did not enter the sewer system. I actually have the backup in my computer. Hang on one second, I may be confusing these. Yes, yep. So what happened is the freeze plate broke on the bottom of the meter. And that releases lots of water when it went through, but it also saves the meter, that's why it's there. So the freeze plate broke on the bottom of the meter, and they were looking for a abatement. They did not state how much, and I apologize. I sent a follow-up email, and the water was discharged out or lost through the broken meter, and it did not enter the sewer system, which I confirmed with Waterworks. It did break, and the freeze plate did break. How much they're looking for as an abatement, that's confusing because this was the information that was presented. I didn't get a bill with it.
well, to make it easy, why don't you just take an average of the last 3 years?
I'd be more than happy to do that. Or actually, if I just took last year's.
Yeah.
And I abate any that's in excess of what it was last year?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's reasonable sense to me.
Do we, I think you mentioned earlier that you don't pursue abatement for pool filling and stuff like that?
Yeah, we haven't, that's what the ordinance says.
Does this kind of follow the same thing, just because it didn't go into the system and be treated?
Yeah, no.
This is failure on our equipment.
Yeah.
Oh, this is our equipment.
The freeze plate, the bottom of it broke. So the freeze plate broke on the meter itself. So if you want, I will abate the difference between what the current bill is and what last year's bill was, and that will make the most sense. And if somebody could just present that in a motion, and I'll advise you what it is once I get the bills, how much it comes out to.
So,
All right, now motion from Councilor Grenier to bring this one to the previous year's sewer bill. Second from Councilor Corson. Any further discussion amongst the council? There being no further discussion amongst the council, all in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, sewer bill is approved.
Next one's from, for a property located at 421 Champlain Street. They had a water heater failure, and they said last July one of the water tanks in the building, a pipe burst, wasn't noticed for a few days, caused a significant amount of water to run in the basement. They have the bill that shows that, the increase, and they also sent me the invoice of when they had the water heater repaired on July 11th, 2024. That's a failure of plumbing. You don't offer under your abatement, you don't offer relief for that, but this water didn't hit the sewer system, it hit the basement floor.
is there any way of verifying that the water didn't hit the sewer system?
Well, the pipe broke in the basement, so I'm sure it just filled up the basement. It's not gonna hit the sewer system.
Because 2 years ago, we did make an agreement for a board based on almost the exact same situation. So, I would move the bill average in the last 3 years.
Can we do it just last year? To make it equivalent to the same quarter for whatever it
Same
is?
amount.
Same amount.
We had to raise.
Oh, no, I mean, when I say amount, I mean volume, not price.
Volume, yes.
Right. So, you know, if they were 10 cubic feet, they were at 100, I'm gonna knock it back to 10.
Yeah.
At current rates.
Yes.
What's the difference between this and a leaking toilet?
Leaky toilet, the water goes into the sewer
Yes, we know
system
it does.
and we treat it because it goes through the toilet. Yeah. Yeah, this one, a lot of times these generally, it's the basement floor.
We have a note.
So the abatement would be for 2024 volume.
We've been processing all that water.
Right.
Well, we're not processing this water.
Right.
Right. So the waterworks, though, the water went through the meter, they made the water, they gave it to them. Waterworks probably gave them an administrative abatement. In this case, it did not continue the sewer system where, even though it's clear water, John Goodrow will tell you still gotta treat it like it's effluent.
We don't track the sewer water, right?
There is no effective way, without being gross,
Yeah.
there is no effective way of treating, of metering that water at service level.
I have a question. Phil, you mentioned administrative abatement. What is that?
So the water department charges for uses and they charge for usage as an abatement.
You want to shut that off?
It's my sensor, medical sensor, I can't shut it off.
So what happens is they charge for both and what they abate is that administrative charge. It's kind of like a fixed charge.
Okay, all right, thank you very much.
Yeah. So this one is to abate to the 2024 volume, excuse me, sorry.
That was Councilor Grenier that made that motion to the previous years. Right? Volume, right?
Yes.
All right, and then the second. Do we have a second? Councilor Pauls, any further discussion? There being no further discussion, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any approved for last year's volume? All right, we have
Green White Mountains LLC, they had a frozen pipe that burst in the winter, basement flooded, and their sewer bill was $3,872, and I sent a follow-up email, and this is all the information that I have that's on this form. So again, this is one that I would deny because it's a plumbing failure, but the basement flooded, and it, again, didn't hit the sewer system because it went all over the floor.
Councilor Red.
We're taking her word for it, unlike another abatement request, we had a billing and communication from a plumber
Yeah.
that actually, I mean, we have no supporting documentation. You know, that this is actually accurate.
Correct.
So, I would move to deny based on the fact that there's no information.
Yeah, the basement is supporting documentation. All right, so I have a motion from Councilor Grenier, second. Councilor Valerino, any further discussion? There being no further discussion, all in favor to deny the abatement? Aye. Any opposed? All right, denied.
Next one you have is from Alan Stock, 10th Street in Berlin. Toilet was running slowly for a few months. I finally realized when I got the water bill how much it was, and I repaired it, and my sewer bill was high also. Again, this is all I got.
Move to deny.
And, motion from Councilor Grenier, where did the second come from? I'm sorry, I was reading. Councilor Corson, any further discussion? There being no further discussion, all in favor to deny the sewer abatement, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All So we've been denied.
And then the last one I have is from Mr. Patel at 81 White Street. They had an issue with water leak in the basement due to old pipes. Please help us if you can. Thank you. The building was remain closed for the whole year. It was not supposed to use any water for the whole year. As you can see, there's water bills in there where the waterworks had abated the administrative fee again. Again, that's a failure of plumbing. I would recommend it denied.
All right, we have a motion from Council Morency for denial, second by Council Valentino. Any further discussion? Any further discussion? All in favor to deny the sewer abatement, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Abatement denied. All right, moving on.
If I could real quick while we're talking about sewer.
Yes, sir.
You have something on your, it's under mayor's report. You received a letter from someone.
Yes.
It's requesting a sewer abatement because they're filling a pool. And, sorry about that. So, thank you. Thanks. So, I'd just like to talk about that a bit. That's clearly a case where that water doesn't hit the sewer system, but it becomes problematic in verifying these things. Well, I don't doubt that this gentleman, or this family's gonna fill the pool. I don't doubt that. It becomes problematic in the future, and we don't have a good mechanism to verify that. It's real simple for me to do the calculation for what the pool holds, and to take that from gallons to cubic feet, and then, issue it. When the... Gotcha. I mean, they could do that at Waterworks as well. I'm sure Waterworks has got a metered hydrant somewhere. Yeah. And they could do that as well. What I did learn, because I had, not related to this, another gentleman called me who installs pools. There's no one in the area. He's having a real hard time finding a trucking company to truck the water. I actually gave him names from people I knew in the Lakes region. Didn't know if they'd come up here, but I tried to throw the guy in ball because he couldn't get a company to deliver.
Well, let me ask you this question. If he's having a hard time finding somebody, a private third-party vendor to fill his pool, who are we going to appoint to check the gallonage?
I threw it up there. I don't want to. Respectful.
I want to sell the water,
Yeah.
and we all know that the water is not going to be treated in the sewer department. So the waterworks could use the water.
But again, the problem becomes trying to find a vendor.
Yeah.
I mean, we could offer that as a solution, and I'm sure that if there's enough of a need, you're going to get a guy with a truck to come up and do it, because we're all
Do we know how much we're talking about here? 15,000 gallons? Like, have they gotten their sewer bill yet?
No, it's like a preemptive, it's a preemptive request.
Okay.
They want to just fill it off the hose, in their yard, let it run, but they of course don't want to incur sewer charges.
It's nice to come and have it.
I mean, I can figure it out and shoot you an email tomorrow, I can figure it out.
Well, I think we need to devise some kind of a method, because once this gets out in the public that I'm doing this, you're gonna have more requests. So we need to have some uniformity
Exactly right now.
on how we're gonna deal with it.
Why I mentioned it, because
And
it's,
who within city government are we gonna appoint to meet with the landowner to do that and have him sign off on the calculation?
that's problematic. The cleanest way to do it is let them purchase the water directly from Waterworks.
Yeah.
Put it in their own truck and then deliver it to the house. That way it never touches the sewer end of it. This is just like anybody else that purchases water.
Correct.
Just like when landscapers put a meter on. If somebody gets a permit to put a meter on a hydrant because they're doing a job, like even when we do the demolitions, we get permission, we put a hydrant on the meter, we get a permit from Waterworks. we pay for the water. But that transaction's between Berlin Waterworks and the entity or company. It doesn't involve the city or the sewer system whatsoever. I think that would be the cleanest way to do it. The whole of
This
that,
doesn't answer my question. Think of it from the end user. How's he gonna get the water?
exactly. I was just gonna say, the whole in that is, we can't, I've had difficulty finding somebody with a truck for a company that could vendor that called me, so the people would have the same thing. If you do it where they just run it off their own hose, that's a little more staff time. Because somebody's gotta go out and verify what that pool holds.
Yep, and I think that the dimensions need to be taken of the pool,
Yep.
and you gotta figure out how many gallons this thing's gonna hold.
And then take it to 1,000 cubic feet, which is an easy calculation. But, again, it's the staff time of somebody that's able to do it.
Who's gonna do it?
Exactly.
What kind of usage is that usually
You figure, not much, what's a pool, 13,000 gallons? Really isn't. When you look at our whole system, I mean, respectfully, if we're under a water emergency, every drop you use is a problem. But if you're in a good place and your supplies are comfortable and they're within conservative ranges, then yeah, 13,000 gallons isn't a big hammer. It's actually better for the system to take it off the hose versus the hydrant, because when you slam a hydrant, you all know what your water looks like in your house.
You get a hammer in the system.
Right. Right. So that way, at least if you have waterworks do it, the hydrant gets eased open, it gets eased closed. You know, when we have people do it, we open the hydrant, we put a gate valve on it. But you're still talking, coming either out of the regular port or the steamer port. You see the size of them. Somebody's hammering a gate valve on the meter side of it, it still can disrupt the system.
Now, when does this person want to fill his pool? Today?
I don't, you have to let her, I can look, it's in your agenda packet. Yeah, it's under mayor's report. I don't think it's specified when, it was just a request.
Yeah, it's just a request in here. Saying new pool will approximately hold 15,000 gallons.
I'm worried about opening up a can of worms with the whole pool filling thing. I don't know if you're putting it in the name and stuff like that. I filled a 30,000 gallon pool and I paid the sewer. Didn't know about it.
I'm just throwing it out there for your discussion.
I think that'd be something for further council discussion. I mean, like, if water.
Well, I hate to kick the can down the road, this is the end of June. Perhaps maybe Phil can discuss this with Donnie at the waterworks. And maybe jointly we can figure out some kind of a path forward.
Yeah.
And you can report back to the next meeting.
I can, right now, do that.
Okay.
The path I would recommend is that you let them buy it from Waterworks and have them pick it up with their own truck. Our staff can't support sending someone out to do that work, and it would fall on us because it's an abatement of the sewer charge, it's not the water charge. I don't have the body to send that, unfortunately. I hate to say that, but I have to.
But what he's actually asking for isn't about filling it, it's about also being charged.
The sewer charge.
That's all he's saying. And I don't think we would have to charge him.
Right, but how do we determine it? And the way to determine it is you have to go out and look at the volume of the pool. Somebody's gonna have to take a measurement of the pool, then figure out how many gallons, take the gallons to cubic feet,
Well,
and then...
he's told us it's 15,000, you're saying we need to verify that?
Oh, yeah, that's my concern, is the verification piece.
Yeah, like I said, that'll be further down the road. We don't need to hardball it on the agenda tonight for the work session. Let's move on to dog civil forfeitures.
That would be me. So the number this year unregistered as of today is 405. So I'm requesting, as I do every year, to send another letter giving them until July 15th, and if they do not register by that time, we will have the police department serve the civil forfeiture notice, which costs $25 fine to do the registration.
That's still a $10 registration.
$6.50 if the dog is later than $5.
And if they're deceased,
All they have to do is go on the
Just for,
Okay? That seems pretty simple.
I just need a motion.
Yeah, look for a motion.
I'll make that.
All right, second, motion, Council Gallagher, second by Council Corson. Any further discussion? Seeing no further discussion, all in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right. Moving on, wastewater superintendent, Dummer, John. How are you?
I am great.
All right, you want to come on up?
Will they sit on seat?
Yeah, yes, sir. The seat right there, no, yeah, the seat right there, between Council Corson and Council Morales.
Bit of a seat. So you invited me here, I'm assuming because you have questions. Yeah. I don't have a formal presentation for you, but you've requested my presence, so let's hear it. I'll try to answer all the questions that you have. I have probably four I'd like to ask you. How many gallons of leachate does the city treat specifically from that area a year? We don't know, because the flow meter is not maintained. Once a year during a dry day, the Department of Environmental Services from Concord will come down and we'll do a time volume measurement. And it's generally around 3.5 gallons per minute, but during a storm, when no one's around, we often have to close off the leachate coming from Dummer Yard because it will overwhelm the Clearville pump station if we don't. They're permitted for, that's what the city's agreement is with the Department of Environmental Services, but they are having an awful time. They just replaced the meter last year and it still doesn't operate properly.
If you had to guess, rough guess, your professional opinion, how many gallons are they treating, what would your best guesstimate?
My best guess with the information I have is that I would say that we're getting the maximum amount that they're permitted to give us at a rolling average of 8 gallons per minute across a 6-month period, which would equal just above 4 million gallons a day.
4 million gallons a year?
Yes. That's an estimate based on what we see, like I said, we don't really know, but we know that we're overwhelmed during a rainstorm.
Now, I know that we treat A-Bars leachate, which is fairly strong, so, they have to pre-treat before it gets to our plant.
They don't pre-treat that.
They don't pre-treat that. Now, would you assume that leachate, because of the infiltration of the rainwater, would you say that leachate is as strong, not as strong as A-Bars leachate?
So the problem, the main treatment for A-Bars leachate is ammonia. And ammonia is treated with air. Air is generated by electricity. It's very costly. The agreement that the City of Berlin made with the Department of Environmental Services in July of 2007 did not require them to monitor ammonia, so we have no numbers on the ammonia coming out of there. So I don't know what that number would be, so I really can't correlate it. I would also say that there are two different landfills also. The Dummer Yard landfill was a dump before there was any Clean Water Act.
I know that you've been told that this area has bark and that area has sludge, but it's not just bark and sludge we're getting in leachate. And everything that the mill wanted to get rid of went in there. In order for me to try to answer your question, we need a study by a set of engineers with numerous samples from many constituents that were not agreed upon to be sampled. And then an engineering study would have to be done as to can we treat it and what the cost would be. I'm not an engineer, and the agreement that the city has with DES that was signed in 2007 does not require them to do any of that sampling, so I can't answer that question honestly, or what it would cost, or what its strength is compared to the other landfill. I'm sorry.
No, but you've walked the property, I have walked the property on many occasions. The leachate on the property is very visible when you walk it. My opinion, it's hazardous. My opinion.
I'll take your opinion. I don't want to enter any of my opinions. I'm here to give you facts as I know them. I can tell you that the solids coming through that leachate line are huge, and that's a cost in ton replacements.
So you're saying there's heavy metals?
I'm not saying there's heavy metals, I'm saying that it's just solids. Solids. Coming out of the landfill, they're trying to tell me that it's organic matter, but they haven't done any studies on it. But what I'm telling them is, where's the impellers out of the pumps, and where's the wheel plates? And to have those pumps rebuilt at that station, back in 2018, it was just under $4,000. And it's been a while since we rebuilt them so they could be viewed. And that's what would be a cost to us as that comes through because of all of the solids.
Now, another question I have is, if the figure is 4 million gallons that were treated, how much is the taxpayers paying to have it treated in dollars?
Again, because I don't know what all the constituents are, it's hard to answer that question. I could tell you that if it is 4 million gallons a year, and we were charging them the regular sewer rate, industrial sewer rate, without any TK or ammonia surcharges or anything like that, then you were probably looking at $100,000, $150,000 a year. That would be what we would be charging them if it was, just the regular sewer rate, without any surcharges.
Mr. Mayor? Yeah. I'd like to add to that, John, you want to explain why we have ammonia and TK and surcharge?
We have those ammonia, it's a TK and surcharge, ammonia is part of the TK, and that is because we need to convert the ammonia to treat it. We bombard the ammonia with oxygen, and it adds an oxygen molecule to it, and we convert that ammonia into nitrite, which is an NO2, and then we continue to bombard that, and the microlac, there's a microsinoma that converts that to ammonia, that ammonia to nitrite, and then we bombard it with oxygen some more and convert it from nitrite to nitrate with microbes called nitrobacters. And then the nitrobacters are returned to a tank at the headworks of the aeration tank, and we starve them for water and oxygen. And when we starve those microorganisms for oxygen, they attack that nitrate and steal the oxygen molecule off of it to breathe, which leaves just an N molecule, nitrogen gas, off gases to the atmosphere. It doesn't, 78% of our atmosphere is that as it is, so that's how we treat that. The cost of bombarding it with oxygen is the blowers. Again, the blowers run on electricity. Our largest bill probably is electricity at the plant. We spend a lot of money on, we spend $20,000 a month on electricity. Throughout the election system.
And if I could add to that, John can confirm this, please confirm this. It is not, that level of ammonia is not something that is customary to a normal sewage treatment process that's normal effluent.
So
It is very specific to landfills.
yes, under normal situations, what's coming out of our households and restaurants and whatnot, it's 40 milligrams per liter, parts per million, 40 parts per million. The ammonia coming out of AVAR is commonly 400 parts per million. And it's a catch-22 because we don't buy oxygen to make our minimum ammonia to get rid of it, and as we add oxygen to the system, it drives the pH down. Now we're going to violate our permitted pH. So it's a real balance in that to do this also. But that's one of the things that we have to deal with, so.
One of the things that you said earlier, a couple things actually, it all kind of struck me. The one that really brought a question, you mentioned that you have to shut off the valve when receiving leachate from Dummer yard. Where does it go?
That's a leachate pond, accumulation pond, that's in the landfill, so it backs up into the leachate pond. And then when the storm subsides, we'll go and we'll crack that valve and start taking it at a higher rate than what we normally get, so that we can drain that pond down, so we're ready for the next storm.
And also, if I could, jumps the curb on Hutchins Street, because it overwhelms the system.
Well, that's supposed to be a groundwater collection basin, that's not a leaching pond that you're talking about.
It's unclear as to, right, you're correct, but it's unclear because of the damages to the existing piping for the leachate system, whether or not it is. But if you look at the staining that comes out of it, you could be pretty much led to believe that leachate's a large contributor to that groundwater. You all know what I'm talking about just before you take the curve on Bridge Street. You look at that right there.
Well, the reason why I asked you, I'm the person who asked you to be here, is, I'm on the planning board. I can't and I don't have a public opinion one way or another on the proposal that's being floated in Congress. But the public needs to know what is going on. And it's not a simple thing, well, I'm opposed to it, I'm opposed to it, I'm opposed to it. There's stuff that's going on over there, and absent of remediation or something, that's just gonna get worse. And you have a whole development down there, the Pear Village, that, could someday be negatively affected by this situation not getting any better. And for the folks who want the state to remediate, the state doesn't have any money. The state can't pay its fair share of education. The state is, right now, one branch of the legislature doesn't want to pay for the Group 2 retirees for retirement window folks. I mean, the state is up to its eyebrows in fiscal situation of their own. They're not going to come up here and fork out $5, $10, $15 million to remediate a situation that 20 years ago that everybody did in good faith, so that the nose would be open. This deal was done in good faith. So the next foreclosure we might have known. Here we are today, dealing with a situation that's not going to correct itself.
Question for you. Are there any specific contaminants that are dangerous to the environment and public health that are coming through that leachate?
PFASs. We have documented samples from DES that the PFAS levels are high coming out of there. Right now, we don't have any limits in our permit for PFASs, but we're required to monitor it. I can tell you that everything we're required to monitor in this permit will probably have a limit in the next permit, and that's going to be an issue. Arsenic levels are high. Because the agreement that was signed in 2007 between the City of Berlin and DES, there were specific items that they were to sample for annually at a level of milligrams per liter, which is parts per million. 17 years later, 18 years later, those constituents are sampled in parts per billion and parts per trillion. But in our agreement, they're not required to do that, so all of their numbers say less than detectable limit, less than detectable limit. If we had the ability to change that and ask them to sample at a lower level, we would actually have numbers that we could look at. But just so you know, right, I'm back up a little bit here. The agreement was established in July, was signed in July 2007. There was a pool of money to do the maintenance. In 2019, DES called me and said that they had run out of money and were wondering if we would take over the land. And I told them the city would run it because we don't want to. They asked if they could renegotiate the agreement, and I told them that we weren't interested in that because the agreement has us just treating the leachate and has them taking care of all the maintenance, all the finances of all the state, everything is their responsibility. So, that being said, I'm sitting here saying that if we could get them to sample at a lower level and get some real numbers, it's going to be a catch-22 if we open that agreement up with them, because they're going to want an expiration date on it, and they're going to want the city to start taking on some of the responsibility. So it's going to be a really touchy situation when you start saying you want them to renegotiate the agreement. You really don't want to. You want to maintain the agreement that we have. So, and DES audited me and said that the city of Berlin does not have industrial discharge permits that are required by 40 CFR. Code of Federal Regulations is what EPA has. That's what we create the statutes. They told us we needed to change all of our agreements to permits, because these agreements are just gentlemen's agreements, we can't change it with that no teeth. But when I tried to write them a permit, they told me I can't write them a permit because they don't own it. Nobody owns it. So I can't write a permit. We have no enforcement against what's going on there. We will not have enforcement against what's going on there until there's a new owner at that facility. So it's a situation where the city's in a bad spot here, because we know we need mitigation there, but we can't. We don't have the teeth to make it happen until it's over.
If I could add one thing to that. So, John's 100% right about that it's a problem because there's no permit holder to go back on. But yet, we're still responsible for what goes through the plant and out to the river. So we bear the responsibility collectively with all of our other contributors of effluent to the city. We bear the responsibility for what comes out of there, even the unknowns today.
There is language in that agreement stating that if the constituents in that Dummer yard landfill leachate would cause us to violate a permit, the state would be responsible for retreatment. So there is language in there. And there's language in there stating that we could change the requirements if our permit
tail-chasing exercise. Because without the discrete reporting of the constituents, we can't prove to a certainty that it was their landfill and showed that, or the landfill that they manage, that caused us to violate permit. Because we don't have that evidence.
If you need to say that I have talked to the industrial discharge supervisor at DES, who is the gentleman who comes and gets the samples and then sends me the report. And I've asked him to start sampling the PFASs. Because they require me to get samples of PFAS from each landfill annually. The DES says he is. So I'm requiring him to do it. He's been amenable to it. I mean, it's not like the DES is just turning their back to me either. I've told them that the meter wasn't working, they replaced the meter, and that didn't solve the problem, because it's not the meter's problem, it's the collection system and discharge system. There was no valve on that leachate pond, and the DES ran out of money in 2019, they did a tour of the landfill. Almost every department of DES was there, including enforcement, groundwater, everybody was there. And we found that leachate pond was overflowing to the environment. And through further investigation, it appears that someone had put a plug in that pipe at some time, and none of that leachate water coming from that pond was hitting the collection system.
So where was that water going?
It was overflowing to the environment.
But that's been fixed.
That's been fixed, and so they worked to get that plug out of that pipe, but now there was no flow control, and what I was reading to was that I said to DES, I need flow control on that pipe, so that it doesn't overwhelm the lift, and they installed a flow control valve in this, and made it accessible to us, so they work with us. But their problem is they don't have the money to do it, so you ask them for something, and they try to get the money, and it takes legislation to get the money, but once they get the funds, they are there to try to help. But like you said, there's not a lot of money. There's no money in governance. Any government, at any level, we're struggling for money. Here in the state, struggling for money. Everybody is. It's the same story everywhere.
So has Dummer Yard been maintained as it needs to be in recent years?
John can answer that as it relates to the leachate system. Other than the rest of the landfill, we don't.
I can tell you that we found a leachate manhole prior to coming to the lift station. We opened it up. 8-inch collection system pipe was all but 1-inch clogged. That entire leachate collection system is just full of solids. It hasn't been cleaned. It doesn't. Nothing's been done there since 2007. And that's the solids I'm talking about, that you get a rainstorm and a big flush, and those solids come to our lift station, all that grit and sand and inorganic matter chews up the pumps, sends wear in our collection system, our catch basins, down into Watson Street, the pumps again there. I mean, it's just wears everything out. And it's because of the lack of maintenance. They're talking about getting the back truck in and cleaning that. They think they've got the funds to start that, but they can't find the manuals.
So if we don't remediate Dummer Yard, what kind of infrastructure improvements need to be made? Roughly, what kind of cost would that incur?
If we don't
Remediate it, and then like, say, something's got to be done, the state or city or wherever makes it infrastructure improvements, how much is that going to cost?
we need an engineering study to find out the equipment required, and then the engineering study would propose a figure, but that would really be an estimate on the time. I really don't know. I can't answer that. I'm not an engineer, and they don't do those kind of studies. I apologize again.
Yeah, no worries.
Yeah, I don't want to lie to you. So,
Council Gordon.
Quick question. and I just read this in the paper, so I'm thinking of it. The city took over the operation for cleaning the sludge, the leaching, and processing that through the system at an annual cost for Abatements. In addition to that, because of that, the state decided to carry the liability for the, what does that mean when they say they're liable for the rest of it? Or what is that liability piece they're talking about? Are they talking about strictly if something goes wrong, legally they're liable for it, or?
I don't think they even use the word liability in the agreement. So when we went into bankruptcy, they sold off the assets. Nobody wanted WR landfill. Nobody still owns it. The leachate was going to go into the environment if they found a home for it. So the agreement was formed that we would take that leachate and put it through our system and treat it, and they would be responsible for the maintenance. That's the actual wording in the agreement. They would be responsible for the maintenance. So if something breaks, they're responsible for it. If we find that there's leachate is violating our permit, they're responsible for pre-treatment. And that's really all we're involved with is the leachate. As far as having a fence around it, having it mowed, having the vents working properly, having the leachate pond not overflowing, all of that stuff is supposed to be policed by DES. So it's a self-monitoring system that they're running there on that landfill.
So the leachate that we are taking care of, at some point that becomes more than we agreed to, it falls back to the state to be corrected.
Yeah, so basically what it is like, we just got a new DES permit, National Discharge Elimination System permit. And in that permit, it requires us to monitor aluminum and copper for the first 12 months and then create a report saying how we're going to reach certain numbers in 36 months. And so we're in the process of doing a local unit study to find out where the copper and aluminum is coming from. Now say we found that the copper and aluminum is coming from Dummer Yard and the amount that they're sending us would cause us to violate those numbers in 36 months, then they would be required to install a pre-treatment system to mitigate that, or come up with money for us to put in a pre-treatment system. But we would not be required to do the pre-treatment. It would have to be an agreement between us that we could do it. Or we could just say, we're not going to do it, it's on your shoulders, you have to do it on your property. So that's what that means by they're responsible for it.
I'm assuming PFAS don't fit into the equation anywhere, because PFAS didn't exist back in the agreement.
That's right.
So that's kind of a new world.
And they've never had to monitor aluminum. It wasn't in the original one. Aluminum is something that they're putting on us now, so if we could write an industrial discharge permit, we could amend that. But we don't have the season for that.
So my other kind of follow-up question to that, what prevents Dummer Yard from falling into the category of a brownfield or superfund?
I believe it already is a brown field.
It already is.
It is, okay.
And I don't know the
federal standard.
I don't know the legalities of distinctions between the two.
Yeah. Well,
You're gonna talk about EPA Superfund. We've had this chlor-alkali situation as a Superfund site for the last 20 years, and it still hasn't been remediated. So,
just started thinking,
I understand the people's concern about that area, but this DES
I will probably negotiate with the developers and the city will not have a whole lot to say.
So I just want to add a couple of items. If it's developed and the new owners, whoever it might be, were to open a new cell, that's going to increase the flow to the Air Village pump station, and we're already at our peak there. We already have to shut the leachate off when we have a good rainstorm, so that we don't become overwhelmed. If they open a new cell and that flow increases just by that, we're going to be looking at even a rebuild on that pump station so that we can handle the flow.
That will be part of it.
And that's what it is.
Manual, if it goes,
It's at the point we have to start thinking about, we basically, bigger pumps, and when we get bigger pumps, we get bigger than. That's kind of what we'll be looking at.
So you mentioned about like when you guys found a pipe that was, only had about an inch left in it, and you can't find, some of the other man covers to get the back trucks up and clean them out. Is it possible that some of the leachate is leaking from the old infrastructure piping along to the facility?
It's certainly possible, but I don't know.
That's what I talked about with James Hutchins Street.
So that's more of this by Tom. Okay. That's the last one I have. I appreciate it. Council, important?
So from my understanding, you do two types of remediation for this type of a site. Exterior remediation, which is where we dig up and remove it somewhere else. Probably not very feasible, it's very costly. So that is the interior type remediation, where they still dig up, and they make sure it's capped properly on bottom, capped on top. From my understanding, that's what remediation is, to make sure that some of these things are in under control, running water is in that. And so, and this maybe is a question for you, or maybe for developers that come here. My understanding is their remediation, and I'd love to go input, is about capping it only, not doing any of the facilities and vulnerabilities. And by capping it on top, I totally understand that recreate the flow structure, stormwater runoff and stuff like that, that may change better in control. But we're not technically remediating that the way the definition of remediation kind of push back to that.
Yeah, I don't know, I've had very little discussion with the company that's planning on doing this, so I really don't know what their plan is. What I would hope would happen is that the new owner would remediate this, which would include repairing and extending the leachate collection system so that we collect all of the leachate out of it. And capping it properly so that we keep the stormwater out of it. But again, I haven't had those discussions with anybody, but I haven't really been part of it, so again, it's difficult to answer that.
Any other council comments, questions? No? Council comments and questions? John, I appreciate you coming and fielding some questions. Thank you very much.
Always a pleasure.
Non-public, nothing under relevant.
We have nothing under non-public. I know it's been a long work session. So we'll take a quick recess, and we'll use the rest of the guy needs the rest, and we'll come right back in and do business.
$3. I think that you guys did a great job keeping me down to 57 cents. So, you guys definitely are doing a good job. So, other than what the other citizens may say, you guys definitely are doing a great job and with what we can work with. It's not much to work with, so good job. Thank you guys.
Thank you very much. Anything else in the council chambers? Yes, sir. King, so state your name and address for the record.
All right, my name is Richard King, 107 Jericho Road, and I know you guys have done some siding and whatnot, but that school budget is way over where it's it has to be. I mean, the thing is, there's less students now than when, you know, we're graduating classes that are under 100. When I went to school, we graduating classes of 300. And, you know, we learned the same thing. What you gotta do is stick with basics when they're young, and then after that, they get into specialty. We need to start putting people into trades instead of, you know, thinking everybody's gonna be a doctor or a lawyer. And that's just my 2 cents on that. And there's one other thing that I forgot right now, so. Anyway, next meeting. Oh, is the week, that budget finalized now?
No, we will be doing that in the regular meeting tonight, sir.
Okay, so that's non-public?
No, we're moving into regular session after this public hearing.
Okay.
Be under unfinished business.
Well, I happen to be against it with the school budget. The rest of it, I think you guys did a really good job.
Thank you very much, sir. Anything else in the council chambers for the public hearing?
I just remembered my other thing. I don't know if I can speak again.
Go ahead, Mr. King.
Okay. Right now the city is, you know, trying to pinch down and whatnot. Why are we taking over Route 110? Buy more stuff that we have to, you know, it's of no interest really to us to expand, to try to stretch our services out further than they already are. I mean, right now they want to go from the Budweiser distributor all the way up to Jericho Lake. And I tell you, the road is in pretty rough shape. I know I live on it. And there's places where there's tires screwed up, they put new culverts in and they're not holding up solid. Every time the truck goes by, it rattles everything. So maybe the city ought to think twice about buying another piece of real estate. We're having to find to take care of what we have now. Thank you. That was the other thing.
Anything else in the council chambers? All right, no? All right. Now we will close the public hearing for resolution 2025-15 adopting the FY2026 budget. All right, we all stand for the Council Abatements, anything else to lead us off? Thank you. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Madam Clerk, roll call.
Councilor Pauls. Here. Councilor Whitney.
Here.
Councilor Morency.
Here.
Councilor Ballerino.
Here.
Councilor Brennan.
Here.
Councilor Poison.
Here.
Councilor Sparge.
Present.
Your Honor.
Here. All right, moving on. Approval of the regular meeting and work session dated for January 2nd, 2025.
Your Honor, I'd like to make a motion to approve the minutes of the regular meeting and work session of June 2nd, 2025.
All right, a motion from Councilor Tabata, second by Councilor Poison. Any discussion? All right, there being no further discussion, all in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right. Minutes, regular meeting and work session has been approved for June 2nd, 2025. All right, next up, disbursements, Madam Clerk.
Disbursement report manifest number 1987 with a start date of June 3rd, 2025 and an end date of June 16th, 2025 for a total disbursement of $1,142,677.39.
Councilor Tabata.
Your Honor, I would like to make a motion to accept Madam Clerk's disbursement report as presented and to pay all bills reviewed and approved by the Committee on Accounts and Claims.
Councilor Tabata, second by Councilor Qualls. Madam Clerk's disbursement report and pay all bills. Any discussion? No discussion, all in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, Madam Clerk's disbursement report approved and pay all bills. Moving on, public comments. Are there any public comments in the council chamber this evening? Yes, sir.
Christian Judson, 73 Forward Avenue. I would like to recognize the Berlin Police Department, Fire Department, and EMS for their two major events that happened over the last 2 weeks or the last week. between the 4 burn victims on Noy Street and as well as the ran over victim on the Berlin-Milan line that happened over the last weekend as well. I'm sure that was not a pretty scene, and I do appreciate their fast speediness to get up Success Road, and thank them both for their time getting up there. And for prayers and wishes to both those families, of course. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, any other comments tonight in the chamber? All right, there being no comments, now we'll move on to unfinished business. Are there any council committee reports?
Yes. They had a successful hazardous waste day. We're running the names and chemicals and stuff, so.
Oh, good.
Thank you to the groups that volunteered to help out with that. And I just wanted to kind of make a note that they also, as of July 1st, there is a new, they call it a ban, but it's disposal of lithium-ion batteries. You cannot do that at our remote. Well, you can do that, but it has to be specifically kind of pulled out. Anything that has lithium-ion batteries, because they can be dangerous. Public might not even know that, put under certain pressures and things. And so you really want to be tossing those things out in the trash. Cell phones, even the vapes nowadays have lithium-ion batteries. So, but Arvin is equipped to take those, so you can dump them off on the side kind of before you pull them in. So just don't want to make it like that.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Any other council committee reports? All right, no further council committee reports. We'll move on to item number 2 on the unfinished business, which is resolution 2025-15 adopting the FY2026 budget, which was tabled June 2nd, 2025. Council President.
Your Honor, with the council, I move to remove resolution 2025-15 from the table.
Resolution 2025-15 from the table. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Resolution 2025-15 has been removed from the table. Council President.
Your Honor, members of the council, I move that resolution 2025-15 be read for the second time by short title.
Motion by Council President, second by Council Falls, that resolution 2025-15 be read for a second time by short title only.
I would like to rescind my motion, as we're going to make some amendments. We have that down, I didn't catch it.
Is that right there?
Okay. I don't have to go through this. No. Your Honor, members of the council, I would move to amend the budget resolution as follows. I would move to reduce the amounts to be expended on health insurance by $132,249 for the general fund, and reducing the sewer fund health insurance amount by $71,869. Allocations of said savings to be made consistent with the attached spreadsheet. And I would also move to increase the transfer to the Berlin Airport line, account number 01-414-414-903-002, $74,411, and reflecting such change in the revenue for account 65-000-335-990-3001. These changes will result in total general fund up at $44,465,164, and the total sewer fund appropriation of $2,788,156.
Motion by Councilor Graham, seconded by Councilor Higby. Discussion. There being no further discussion, we will vote on the amendment. And all in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right. Adopt. Councilor Graham.
Your Honor, members of the council, council, I move that resolution 2025-15 be read for a second time by short title as written.
All right. That motion from Councilor Grenier, that resolution 2025-15 be read for a second time by short title as amended. Second by Councilor Morency. Madam Clerk.
Hang on. Well, because what we did was we amended the general fund total, but the resolution has the total in it. So I gotta re-add that up for the purpose of reading. I know. Too many moving pieces.
So we
Stand by.
make a change.
We're doing it right now. Thanks, Paul, no pressure. Hang on 1 second. No, it's off this sheet, Holly, not that.
Okay.
So, because the amounts increased. The amount went to the
Yep.
other one, so. Yeah. So we got 786. Available, there's a lot of moving pieces in there, I got this wrong. Just checking it now. 57051987. Is that what you got too? Yeah. Okay, so then.
Okay, that's it.
So, the amount, thank you, you say you don't, just doing it on trash. So, the way it would read is, as amended. Is the resolution. Following adopted, the sum would be 57,051,987.
5705.
5705,987. Is that what you got?
Yeah.
Okay. So that's what it will be.
A
Yep.
resolution adopting the budget in the amount of $57,051,987 and appropriating such to defray the expenses of Berlin City Government for fiscal year 2026.
Your Honor, members of the council, at this time, I will move that resolution 2025-15 be read for a third reading by short title. As amended.
Council Mayor, seconded by Councilor John, that the resolution 25-15 be read for a third and final time as amended. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Madam Clerk.
Resolution adopting the budget in the amount of $57,051,987 and appropriating such to defray the expenses of Berlin City Government for fiscal year 2026.
Your Honor, members of the council, I move to pass resolution 2025-15 as amended.
Motion, Councilor Grenier, second by Councilor Federino, for move to pass resolution 2025-15. Discussion? Is there any discussion? All right, we'll be moving to the discussion. Madam Clerk, take a roll call vote.
Councilor Waltz?
Yes.
Councilor Higby?
Yes.
Councilor Muncy?
Yes.
Councilor Alamier?
Yes.
Councilor Grenier?
Yes.
Councilor Quizzen?
Yes.
Councilor Sparks?
Yes.
Your Honor.
Yes. All right. Resolution 2025-15 passes. All right, moving on to new business.
That was awesome.
Moving on to new business. Right, we have resolution 2025-16, NHSL Summer Learning Grant, first reading, Madam Clerk.
Mayor, Award 2025, a resolution authorizing an application to New Hampshire State Library Summer Learning Grant 2025, provided by the Saul Oceanside Park Memorial Foundation in memory of Rebecca Lease, in the amount of $500, for the purpose of supporting the extension of the 2025 summer reading program. Resolved by the City Council of the City of Berlin as follows. Whereas Berlin Public Library remains committed to continually enriching the educational and recreational offerings to the youth of Berlin through its summer reading program. And whereas we endeavor to broaden access to non-traditional literary formats for youth, including large print books, audiobooks, graphic novels, and similar resources. And whereas we aim to foster sustained juvenile readership and year-round literacy by providing appealing books as incentives for participation, now therefore be it resolved by the City Council of the City of Berlin as follows. That the city manager is authorized to receive grant funds in the amount of $500 from New Hampshire State Library Summer Learning Grant 2025, provided by the Saul O. Sidor Memorial Foundation in memory of Rebecca Lee Spitz, and the grant proceeds are hereby appropriated for the purpose of the grant, and all grant proceeds shall be deposited with the city treasurer, and the city manager is authorized to do all things necessary to effectuate this grant. This resolution shall be in full force and effect from and after passage.
Councilor Grenier.
Your Honor, members of the council, I move to table this resolution with a public hearing to be held, I believe, it's July 6th.
7.
7th.
right, a motion from Councilor Brannigan that resolution 2025-16 tabled to the public hearing scheduled for July 7th. And a second from Councilor Valerino. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? All right, resolution 2025-16 has been tabled with a public hearing set for July 7th, 2025. All right, next on the business, city manager report.
Attaches the April 2025 activity report from the police department, also attaches the May 2025 real estate transfer report. Center and sidewalk painting of city roads has been completed, staff is now working on sidewalk painting, including parking spots. Waterworks is performing their work on Kent Street. We anticipate getting there after they complete their work, hopefully within the next month. Pothole and road damage repair is ongoing. Engineering firm for the race grant is working in the area performing test borings to establish subsurface conditions. I have one item that is not I have seen an increase of people using the public way in an inappropriate fashion as it relates to yard landscaping and renovations. The public way is not the place to dump your mulch, leave your stock, dump your excess materials in the road, nor is it the place to put a dumpster, a storage trailer, or anything else that's not registered, especially when the house has a driveway that the registered vehicles could be moved into the street and the dumpster could be placed in said driveway. That's a hazard, what I call jokingly a hazard to navigation, especially when you put out the sidewalks to the road. And when you rain, what is the mulch doing? Raining around drainage collections. So that's the thing that we'll be looking at. My department, I'll be leading on the police department. Where's the sergeant? We'll be leaning on the police department for some assistance. There is absolutely no reason that a dumpster needs to be in the street when it can be placed in the driveway. Put the registered vehicles in the street and not in the parking lot there. There and then's my rate. Mr. Mayor, that's all I have.
Okay. I do have a couple questions for you. So I saw some people in the pickleball court. Those are completed?
No. We haven't put the nets up yet. The nets were in there temporarily, we were sizing them.
Yeah.
We're finding out it's gonna take a little more work to get them so that they stay stable, because there's not a lot of digging. We're gonna put in bases for them, and that's the last piece. Hopefully they'll be done by the end.
All right. Councilor Corso.
Quick question, in talk of what's dog complaints under 3 years so far, do we have like a cross-referencing with the dog complaints versus how many people aren't registered, or is there anything that you got opportunity to kind of check those? I mean, there's a correlation, it's something to think about. Maybe if the police officers want to say, hey, you know, just as a reminder, as they're doing those, might help somebody out.
Two different data collection systems, but we would absolutely send the information to the PD so that they can have it.
Phil, just a different person, I got a call this morning regarding steel storage containers. Are those permitted?
They are not permitted in residential zones, but we can go.
I'm right here.
So excited.
They're not theoretically permitted, however, they have really sprung up over the years, and due to a lack of available staff for enforcement, because it's like whack-a-mole, we really have kind of had other higher priorities to deal with.
Thank you, Rick. They seem to be popping up everywhere.
Yes, they do.
Thank you. And I have a question for the police chief. Thank you, chief, for being here. It seems that the motor vehicle stop violation reporting, it's often, it's a high number. Is that typical?
So this was 3 weeks in now, but my understanding is this is the first time the police department's been fully staffed in about 6 years, which means we have more officers on the streets, which means obviously there would be traffic stops would go up. But without researching the system, what those stops entail, that's the only thing wrong.
Questions? Yes, sir. I spoke to the chief a little bit about the police department. One of the things that's come to my attention is e-bikes, electric scooters. There's no regulation on these things, and they're everywhere and anywhere. And whether they're going to be treated like a bike or whether they're going to be treated as a motorized vehicle, I think, and I'll bring it to context, because I think we need to look at this in the state and say, because you're going to get into electric cars too and so forth. But right now, I mean, you're seeing them cross through parking lots or people's property and going against traffic. They're just everywhere. Some people are very responsible with them, but we've got some of these things going 40, 50 miles an hour with 12-year-old kids on them too. Right, in our day, that was a moped, right? Yeah. Motorized. So just, I don't know if this has anything to do with, there was a child hit today, and I'm not putting blame on anybody. I'm just saying that, I don't know who's to blame in that. But I've seen a lot of these electric scooters cutting in front of cars, not paying any attention.
Motorized vehicles, and the question is.
So no e-bikes.
Right. But the question is, some of them are assisted, there's different classes of them, and there's no regulation, it's the Wild West.
But our grant agreement says we won't allow them.
Right, motorized vehicles.
I guess if nothing else, it brings attention to it, and maybe that's a thing, get this out there, that people need to be careful with these things.
I think we also have an ordinance about skateboarding in the downtown area, if I'm not mistaken. We have an ordinance that says it's not, you're not supposed, but, hey, I was a skateboard kid, 40 pounds lighter a long time ago. But, they are not the major contributor to these conflicts. It's the scooters and the bicycles that are the big contributor to these conflicts on the side.
Any other council comments or questions? Any other council comments or questions? I'll entertain a motion to accept the city manager's report as presented. Council Grant? Any council Malino? All right, any further discussion? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, the manager's report accepted and placed on file. Moving on next, mayor's report. I got a few items for you this evening underneath that. Our first one is a letter from Ms. Seymour regarding a crosswalk. On May 23rd, there was an incident in front of my barber shop at 52 Mason Street. There was nearly run over walking to my car after work. The driver intentionally sped up. Luckily, there was a police officer behind this particular driver, and the driver moved up. This is not the first time this has happened. I've asked for a crosswalk in the past from Oak Street to the entrance of the municipal parking lot. Not only for safety for myself, but for my clients and Dr. Leonard Shaw's patients as well. Drivers see the thing because there isn't a crosswalk there, it needs to be able to pedestrians. I've already emailed the city manager, and he asked me to email you corresponding to him. Naomi Seymour, owner operator, Naomi's here. And I do believe Bill has.
Yep. So that needs to be referred to traffic safety, but I just passed the map around to you to give you a little layer of command. And I took some measurements. And if you go from the front door of the hair salon and you go to the signalized controlled crosswalk at Pleasant and Mason Street, that's approximately 108 feet. All indications when you put in crosswalks is that you don't put them in so they intersect in the middle of the road, the middle of a driveway, middle of a parking lot. You notice I have red X's on there, and those are the places where you couldn't put a crosswalk. So the only place that you could would reduce the distance, as you can see by the X's, by about 30 feet, which would make it 75 feet, give or take, to the next crosswalk. But we would also have to figure out some type of transition or refuge area on the parking lot side, and as you can see, that's all forest there. So I just throw that out there. I will tell you that I know it's going and safety, but my recommendation is gonna be traffic should be directed to the established signalized crosswalk.
This is a revisit. And if you recall, we visited this, Jim's busy, but we visited this exact issue and we looked at the, what the Fed laws would allow us to do and the distances. And unless something has changed, we can't do anything.
You can say the same problem with the, across the street over there.
On Salvation Army.
Yeah, Salvation Army, you have the same problem. Yeah, the difference with the Salvation Army is, I don't know, you know, I was also concerned with the Salvation Army one regarding the actual crossing and traffic counts there. This one has an established signalized crosswalk, which is, when you look at the hierarchy of where you should cross, that's the highest one, because that affords you the most protection. So I would ask that the council take a motion to refer it to traffic and safety, but I'm just giving you this as a primer.
Councilor Grenier.
That would be, I would move to refer to traffic and safety for a recommendation of the full body. Second.
Motion by Councilor Grenier, second by Councilor Corson. Any further discussion? Any further discussion, all in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, letters being referred to traffic and safety. Next up, I have a letter of interest to the Police Commission from Ms. Argman. And that letter states, Honorable Mayor, Cohen, council members, please accept this letter as an expression of my interest in serving the city as Police Commissioner. A lifelong resident of Berlin, I graduated from Berlin High School in 1983 and obtained my AAS in General Science from the Educational College, White Mountains Community College in 1985. The curriculum was comprised of general business studies, including courses such as accounting, business law, communications, economics, and office management. I was also hired by the city in 1985 and remained in its employ for over 35 years. Initially serving as clerk of the Berlin Health Department for 9 years. I was hired by the Berlin Police Commission in 1994 to fill the position of administrative assistant to the chief. I remained with the department for over 26 years until my retirement in 2021. During my tenure with the police department, I became proficient in administrative tasks, including monitoring expenditures, assisting with budget preparations, and aiding in the development of contracts. My position also provided the opportunity to see all components of the department, working with other law enforcement personnel and support staff, also interacting with the police commission. I had great respect for the department and law enforcement responsibilities and community. I believe my years of experience and familiarity with the Berlin Police Department's operations would be beneficial to the commission and city. It would be a privilege to serve under this capacity of the police commission, and I hope to be given the opportunity to discuss this further. Thank you in advance for your consideration. Respectfully, Consent Department. Councilman Morenzi.
I'd just like to comment on this. I'm sure the doubt that like this argument put into this. I worked with this argument for 26 years. She knows that we've been working not only in the police department, but the city as well. You know, labor laws, finances, the roles and responsibilities. The way I think we're somewhere around 300 meetings, 300 commission meetings you've been at. I think you understand how they operate and how they work. But aside from being a loyal and caring person, she would be a great fit for this position. One that way.
Councilor Rowland.
I have to concur with former Chief Morency. I had the pleasure of working with Mrs. Argman for 20 years, and I think she would be a phenomenal choice to be police commissioner. She brings so much to the table that I'm honored that she has an interest in serving the city. As I said, she's she's done a phenomenal job, absolutely phenomenal job, and I can tell you that I asked her to do a letter. She had already done that letter a week before, and I asked her to mail it. She mailed it the same day she did the letter. And asked if she could put in the file. She said, reject the file, it's been there for a week. So, outstanding job. Absolutely outstanding job. I support it 100%.
All right. Anything else from the council?
So with no prejudice whatsoever about Ms. Arvin, and certainly I respect the opinions just offered here. In the past, we've had a sort of a competitive process where we've invited folks to come in and speak to the council. And I think that's a good idea. I would like to see that happen again when it comes time to.
We weren't gonna fill the position this evening because.
Right, okay, I just wanted to go on record.
Yes, this is gonna go.
And certainly, it sounds like she'd be a great candidate.
Yeah, so we're gonna go on record for when it's available, and then we'll move forward with the candidate.
Thank you.
All right. Anything else from the council?
Do you want to advertise for a police commissioner? Because his term runs out in July, the existing commissioner.
As of yet, I think we decided not to because he wanted to keep going through December. And we couldn't extend him, but we said we could not fill the position.
You can do that, and then he could stay in holdover status, but his term does expire. And these are for terms certain. It's not set up until the successor is appointed, they're for terms certain. So his term's going to expire, so you would have to either appoint him for a shorter time, temporary or holdover appointment.
Can't do that. That's the way the charter is written.
It doesn't, right, because it does not specifically say you can and you can't. And you can't just let him sit and hold over, because if you don't do anything, it expires, because it is his term certain.
We'll decide that. I think the next meeting will be enough time to get it out.
Okay. Well, his term ends in July. Ends in July. Okay.
There's time there. All right. Perfect. Moving on. Yes, sir.
I would move to accept the communication from Ms. Arbor
Yep.
and place on file.
All right.
Second.
All right. Council Grenier and second by Council Fortune to accept the communication from Ms. Hartman and place on file. Thank you, Mr. Dunn. Moving on to the next one. We have a request for a sewer charge adjustment for our initial pool bill. This individual, dear Mr. Cohen, City Council, we're longtime residents of the city and have maintained an above-ground pool at our property for over 20 years. Unfortunately, due to severe winter weather this year, the frost caused significant ground movement and led our pool to collapse. As a result, we've had to replace the pool entirely. The new pool will approximately hold 15,000 gallons of water. In the past, the city provided accommodations for homeowners by allowing them to fill their pools at a discounted water rate and exempting the initial fill from sewer charges. Since the water does not enter the city sewer system, we were recently informed we would now be charged sewer fees for the water used to fill our new pool. We respectfully request that the city consider an adjustment that allows us to fill our pool without sewer charges. The water used in the initial fill without discharge into the sewer system. And since it's retained in the pool, we should not be subject to sewer fees. Thank you for your time and consideration. We greatly appreciate any assistance or guidance you provide in this matter. Devin and Jean Foss, on Portland Street. We have that we discussed in the work session. That we're going to try to find a path forward.
I think that what I had stated in the work session is the path forward would be that we recommend the people to purchase the water from the waterworks that they can afford it free. Because the other one's going to require staff time from staff, I don't know, to calculate out. And it's not something we can ask the waterworks to do because they're not looking for relief on the water fee, they're looking for relief on the sewer charges. So, what does the council, I just am curious as to how the council wants us to respond back to Mr. and Mrs. Foss on this.
My opinion, I feel like something can be done so they don't incur the sewer cost. But as of how we navigate that, I don't know. You mean if, like you said, if they don't incur it by going to the waterworks department, that's the avenue. Yeah, unless they normally decide to fill it up with their hose, then I guess so.
I'd be curious to see what kind of sewer charge will be 15,000 gallons. Kind of around that gate. If we're talking about $2,000, yeah, we're talking about $100 to fill up my pool. And then incurred cost. It would, yeah.
There's a variable out here that we don't know.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. Okay. So 15,000 gallons equates out to 20 CCF. We charge $8.02 per CCF, so you're talking $160.
I think it's gonna cost you that to rent a truck to get it.
You think?
More. I think that's what you can kind of take your pick, you know, bring in.
Having the information in front of you kind of gives you the answer.
And as I'm thinking of the sewer takes, we just did some of those $3,000 and stuff. And I'm looking at $160.
I just grabbed Lacass's just out of curiosity, just so I could see the sewer rate. And just so you know, his CCF was 178 for the amount of $1,427.
Your Honor, I would move to accept the communication from Deb and Jean Foss, place on file, no further action taken. Second.
Council Brenner, second by Council Valerino. Any further discussion? Thank you. No further discussion. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Last but not least, five, the mayor's report. And just get the mayor's report. Valerino, second by Council Brenner. Any further discussion? No discussion. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And moving on. Public comments, are there any other public comments in the council chamber this evening? Being no public comments, we'll move on. Are there any council comments? Council
I
Brennan.
have one. I just want to remind the public and the audience that Councilor Higby, I guess the council had adopted some process to interview folks who may have an interest in serving the community. Ultimately, it's the mayor's job to appoint subject to council approval. So if the mayor chose tomorrow to appoint somebody to a position, and you don't go through this review process, the mayor has the authority under the charter. If you read the charter the way it's written, a police commissioner and a water commissioner will remain in their positions until a successor is named. So there's no 2-month position, 6-month position. These are the holdover the status until you determine that you want to appoint somebody to the police commission. I've never held, personally, I have never held anybody in holdover. I don't know, I was first on the city council in 1992. I can't remember the then mayor having anybody in a holdover. Holdover usually is when you have a vacant position, you can't find anybody to take the position. So, just my 2 cents. Read the charter, makes right. Really, council may want to ask, at the end of the day, it's his decision. He wants to make that decision alone. Then you have the right to yay or nay based on the qualifications of the person that is nominated.
Any other council comments or questions? Councilor Moran?
Not on that, I don't know if anyone saw the news today, the AG's office has settled with Sackler family with $30 million on the opioid abatement. Based on that, you know this formula is always going to be nuts, there's 23 communities that sued, and we get to split up 15% of that. So it's a couple $100,000 coming our way based on this number. So it's good, it's something. You know, should be more, but it's something.
Any further council comments?
Just a quick comment. I attended the Black Heart event on June 7th. It was well attended. Excellent demonstrations on the part of the Air National Guard. We were really pleased. The questions that were asked and the members of the public and whatnot. So I was very well impressed with how it was set up and the answers to the questions. Thank you.
Being no further council comments.
There are no further council comments, Your Honor. I move to adjourn.
All right, motion to adjourn, Councilor Higbee.